Buenas tardes, good evening, welcome to UCSD Guestbook. My name is Jorge Mariscal. My guest tonight is Salvador Torres. Mr. Torres is one of the most important Mexican-American artists and Chicano activists of his generation. He and his wife, Gloria, are the owners of the Metro Gallery in the Barrio Logan. And from monumental murals to ceramics, Salvador Torres has excelled in every area of his field. We're very honored to have him here tonight. Bienvenidos, Salvador.
Gracias.
Welcome.
Jorge.
Salvador, I wonder if we could just begin at the beginning and if you can tell me where you were born and raised and how you eventually came to California.
I was born in el Barrio del Diablo in El Paso, Texas in 1936. And my parents, at the age of 3 months, moved to California, in Northern California, to a cotton plantation by the name of Fawcett Ranch. It was also a dairy farm where they raised melons and alfalfa.
And when you were there, you referred to it as a plantation. Could you describe what the economic situation was and how workers were treated?
During this time period of 1936, it was very typical of the Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath period, where a lot of people were coming and going from Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Texas. So we were there I was there until I was to the age of about 6 years old. And then we moved to San Diego, California. My parents came to work in the canneries, in the tuna canneries here. And this is where I received my basic education in the San Diego City schools.
Can you say something about the Logan District in those years? What was the neighborhood like? This was before the freeway, obviously, and before the Coronado Bridge.
On my arrival in 1942, the Logan Heights area was very, very unique. Of course, the industry was the canneries. Then during the war period of San Diego, the basic industries was the aircraft industry. But Barrio Logan also contained a neighborhood house where we all grew up and became familiar with ourselves as individuals. The waterfront was very important to us, and so I've done several watercolors of the waterfront. Right now we're looking at one where the bridge is being built. The first iron was established, and I did a watercolor of that. This is after my returning from the Bay Area.
Can you talk about a little your educational experience here in San Diego State, but especially up in Oakland?
In 1957, I was working at Convair, and I quit there and went to City College to study art and got a scholarship to the California College of Arts and Crafts. And when I arrived at the College of Arts and Crafts in the 1960, the Bay Area was seething with revolutionary thought, and there were a lot of activities taking place. The poets, the writers, the painters, all of them were very active in creative demonstrations in their art. I discovered a very interesting art form that I was very excited about, which has to do with the mud-flat art movement. At Arts and Crafts, Jose Montoya was there, Esteban Villa, Ralph Ornales, the poet, and Roy Scott, and a few others. And this is where we began thinking at a much later time about returning to our communities and developing our art as well as serving our communities.
Now, I know you did some work for Octavio Romano at El Grito magazine, which was coming out of Berkeley. Can you talk about that a little bit?
When I arrived back in 1967, see, I married in 1960 to a beautiful woman by the name of Carolina, and had 3 wonderful daughters that we always enjoyed and had fun with. The marriage didn't quite work out. My temperament, my psychological behavior patterns in the art world and as myself weren't compatible. And so I came back to San Diego after the marriage dissolved and attempted to reunite, but wasn't very successful. But I began doing portraits. The first portraits I did were of sailors in downtown San Diego. And I was attempting to make some money out of it. So my first portraits were for 10 cents. And then it went from 10 cents to a quarter, and then from a quarter to 50 cents, and then finally to $2. So I wasn't eating very well, and so I became very ill. And I went to the hospital here at the UCSD hospital, and I was in the tuberculosis ward for 8 months recovering. And it's during this time period that I did a whole series of drawings and portraits of the patients. This particular drawing that you're looking at right now is of a man who died about 3 days after I did his portrait. This other one you're looking at is one of a woman that was operated on. And it was also during this time that I had sent Octavio Romano a series of drawings that I titled Daydreams from a Hospital Bed. And I also did this wonderful portrait of Ueda, a Japanese gentleman that you're looking at now. So that's the time period that I did this wonderful work for Octavio. And much later, Octavio came to San Diego, and I wanted to do a portrait, an etching of him. And I pursued him because we had a conference and he came to San Diego, and I pursued him everywhere. I followed him even to the bathroom with my plate and my etching needle, and I did this wonderful portrait of Octavio.
Octavio Romano, who was one of the leaders of the early Chicano movement up in the Berkeley area, he was a professor at Berkeley. Now, here in San Diego, you were absolutely instrumental in the founding of the Centro Cultural de la Raza in Balboa Park. And in the early 60s, as you mentioned, in the Bay Area, the Chicano movement was getting started. By 65, Cesar Chavez and the UFW was going strong. Could you tell us a little bit about the takeover of the Ford building in Balboa Park and what you all were trying to attempt with that takeover?
I think one of the most unique aspects of the Centro Cultural de la Raza during this time period was the fact that we were attempting, and I was attempting, to reach our community, our youth, to provide classes for them in drawing, painting, sculpture, and a cultural center involves not only just the fine arts, but also the performing arts. And so one of the most powerful things that occurred during this time period of 1969, 1970, is Católicos por la Raza had organized themselves in Los Angeles, and they had exposed the Catholic Church in support of Cesar Chavez. When this time period, Cesar was pleading with the church to support the farm workers, and they were not. They really were not during this time period. And Cesar came out with a critique on them. And Católicos por la Raza organized themselves. They had a retreat here in Descanso, California here, and they decided to take over Camp Oliver, and they did. And they held it for about 2 weeks, something like that. And their protest was that the Catholic Church should turn over the Camp Oliver to the Centro Cultural de la Raza. But 6 Chicanas were arrested during this time period, but the concept continued to germinate. And I had already been teaching in Walnut Creek. I had the experience of teaching in Walnut Creek, California, at the Civic Arts Center. And I knew the uniqueness of a cultural center and how important a cultural center could be to our community. And so this ideal continued to germinate. And so with the takeover of the Ford building for the use of a development of a mural, I was going to do a mural, portable mural, to send to the first Chicano student conference ever to be held in Denver, Colorado, a call for by Corky Gonzalez in the Crusade for Justice. Right. By the time this all took place, everybody came back, and they found out that that I was in the Ford building. And
Can I ask you, what was the city's attitude during this time? The city was refusing to give you all any space?
We're looking at a period from 1969, 1970s. San Diego has a certain attitude about the arts, and I think that the arts that Chicanos, Mexican Americans, Latinos, Hispanics, whatever you would like to refer to them, I like to call myself a Chicano artist. Mm-hmm. But is important to all of us. And with the takeover of the Ford building, they were very incensed about this. And so they made a proposal that we leave the Ford building. They would give us $22,000, and we could have either water tank where the Centro is. There was 2 water tanks there. Mm-hmm. The old firehouse in Marston Point. A building downtown, or they even offered me a painting studio in Spanish Village. Whew. But I refused. I retreated back to the barrio and began planning for the murals there in Chicano Park.
Right. Now, Chicano Park is one of the great moments in the Chicano movement, and there's actually been a film made about it. And you were instrumental there, and your wife. Can you talk about the events leading up to the takeover of the land, and what you feel the takeover of land means in terms of the struggle for justice for minority groups in this country?
I think the period for the growth of Chicano Park and the concept of the monumental public mural program that was conceived during this time period, I think this period was so dynamic that there were many people involved. And so, as a result, people had an opportunity to empower themselves and make demands to the city. The elders of our community had already suggested that the land at the Coronado Bridge, the excess land, could be a park, and they were negotiating for that. And then suddenly we were confronted with the Highway Patrol being located in that area. Now, mind you, there's nothing wrong with having law and order or some form of order on the highways, but it just so happens that we wanted to see a park there and not a highway patrol station. So this event immediately sparked the most important historical event of our history in Chicano history. People came together and they marched on the land, they picketed, they demonstrated. I was occupying the Ford building at that time, and so the occupation of land and the occupation of the Ford building were at the same time. And so it was also during this time period that I proclaimed that we would do these murals. And so I asked permission from Bert Theisel, who was the bridge manager at that time, that we wanted to beautify our location there and create murals. And so what we're looking at now is probably one of the most unique part of the ideas of including a tram, a monorail, and murals that would extend themselves all the way across to the other side of Coronado.
In terms of the takeover of the land, I know you've actually met and interviewed Reyes de Cadena, who from '67 on was fighting a land struggle in New Mexico. Did his movement have any influence on you all here in San Diego?
When he came here to UCSD to speak to the Chicano students, he was on the platform here. on the stage, and they gave him a note, and he read the note, and he said they had just bombed my office. We were stunned. Reyes Lopez Tejerina, I consider him to be one of the most important figures in our history, in our movement, because of his dedication and his knowledge of the land grants and how they were transferred and even in some cases stolen from the people. So he talked about the idea of the Indo-Hispano. And he also talked about, the last time I saw him, his new book, a very dynamic new book in English that is soon to come out.
Did you know Corky Gonzalez? Did you ever meet him?
Corky, I met him on several occasions when he came to Chicano Park. Same thing with Cesar Chavez. We did a beautiful commemoration for him when he came and spoke at the Local 89 Union Hall. A lot of these figures that have played very key roles in making people aware of themselves, aware of their social conditions. I think they're very inspirational, and we should study them more often and look into their lives and see their things that they have contributed, look at some of their failures, judge it for yourself as to how we can progress.
Right. Now, Cesar Chavez obviously was an important figure for everyone in the movement, and the symbol of the eagle for the United Farm Workers, which they created for themselves and put on the flag, and I think we're looking at a picture of it right now. You've done a series now on that eagle. Could you talk about Viva La Raza series?
This painting, Viva La Raza, was first conceived after the San Diego Gas and Electric ran an ad in the Life magazine, a derogatory ad that put down the Mexican community, the Chicano community, by running this ad, talking about how great San Diego was with its showing its lights and everything. And at the bottom of the ad, it had a small caption, "Unless you want to stay small like some people." And they had this Chicano wearing boots and a bigote and a taco stand. And like today, there's a lot of effort to try and sensitize the general community about stereotyping, about this terrible feelings that people feel from seeing derogatory ads. We put a picket around San Diego Gas and Electric, and this is the first time in San Diego that the Chicano community was saying, "Viva la Raza!" And they would, we would cry out, "Viva la Raza!" And we would hear a response, "Viva!" And so from this time period, we're looking at pictures of the demonstration, and we're also seeing the first illustration of the painting. And now I began doing a series of paintings. I had already adapted the farm worker image because to me it was important. Because I grew up in Fawcett Ranch. My mother, my father working in the fields. I remember my mother dragging me around in a cotton sack. And she also made a small little sack for me to pick plumas, which were the when the cotton is ready to flower and it grows out, and you pick the cotton ball, there's always little strands of cotton. And so the children were the ones that picked the plumas. We called them the feathers. Mm-hmm. And so she had this little sack for me to pick. Mm-hmm. The melons, there was a lot of picking of the melones. It was very interesting, the melones, that period. And so the farm workers have always been part of my life. And so when Cesar Chavez came forth with this unique idea of organizing the people to have better conditions in the fields, it appealed to me immediately. Because I was working as a young man, working in Hollister, picking grapes, plums, apricots, in the same area where Luis Valdez is located, his teatro. My mother and my grandmother are buried in Hollister. So when the farm workers were making their their efforts to organize themselves. I was inspired by this image because it reminded me also of, and through my research, I found that this image was also found in a lot of Native American art.
Right.
And so I began exploring this image and discovered the uniqueness of the phoenix bird. The myth of the phoenix bird is that it rises from its ashes, gathers its energy, and becomes very dynamic, and then through its own energy, it begins to consume itself and returns back to ashes. And then, like La Raza Nueva, coming up again. So it's a very unique image. And so I began painting a whole series of these. And then something else was really unique. The farm workers started painting their own banners and picket signs, and when they painted the image of the farm worker, they had sometimes some of the most dynamic and some of the most comical and some of the most powerful images, because a lot of those farm workers really didn't have any art training. Mm-hmm. So I call that huelguistas art.
The strikers art.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so from that, I began doing a whole series of work.
Do the colors red and black, which are typical of the UFW flag, are those meaningful to you in some way beyond the apparent? In other words, is it related to indigenous culture in some sense, or?
I think the colors are very symbolic in many ways. Red has a lot of passion. It's a very hot color. The black is very solemn and also very deep. The blues are cool, and the yellows are bright. So all of these different colors have symbolism to them. And it's important to understand the colors and the use of the colors, like in our murals as well as in our artwork, to create feelings. I think that the symbol of the black, red, and white was a very dynamic color scheme used for organizing the masses.
Right. Now, going back to the murals in Chicano Park, could you talk to us about the groups that came down to San Diego? Because it wasn't just the San Diego collective, but there were other groups that worked on the murals. And maybe you could talk about some of the murals that you did in the park.
Well, to begin a project like that, first I went to see David Alfaro Siqueiros, and we're seeing a portrait of him right now, and during his inauguration of the Poliforum. And I went there because when I was a student, art student, they were passing out a petition to free Siqueiros from prison. And so the petition was signed, and much later Siqueiros was freed from prison, and Don Manuel Suarez commissioned him to do this, probably Siqueiros' most dynamic and most powerful mural of his time period. And I've always admired David Alfaro Siqueiros for his dynamic involvement in the community, his involvement with the unions, his involvement with the other artists.
He's one of the great three Mexican muralists.
One of the most dynamic. There was David Alfaro Siqueiros, Jose Clemente Orozco, and Diego Rivera. So Siqueiros was one of the last of these great masters. To me, he was like Michelangelo. Mm-hmm. And I went to see him. And he talked about the Mexican mural movement. And I documented this. I documented his inauguration of this mural that he painted that Don Manuel Suarez commissioned him to do. It was called La Marcha de la Humanidad en Latin America, the Humanities March in Latin America. And it was probably one of the largest, most complex murals that ever done by him. He called it, his concept was pintura escultura.
And did you actually work with Siqueiros, or did you observe him?
No, I observed a lot of his works. When I went to the inauguration, I heard him speak about the Congreso de Artistas Chicanos, He talked about the Congreso de Artistas Revolucionarios, which involved artists from the the literature, sculpture, painting. These artists all came together on a congress, as a form of a congress. And their efforts were to support the communities and to see social justice and to make these changes. So when I came back to San Diego, I used my documentation that I made of this period to organize the Chicano artists to begin the efforts of establishing the Chicano Park Monumental Mural Program. And so in the beginning there were Artistas del Barrio, and then there was Toltecas en Aztlán, which is another art group. And then there was the Congreso de Artistas Chicanos en Aztlán. And then we invited artists such as the Niños del Mundo from Los Angeles, and then the Royal Chicano Air Force from Sacramento, and then other artists from Mexico came to work with us. And so from that period on, other artists began to involve themselves. And also, I got on TV several times and on radio and announced to invite artists to come and work with us.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned some artistic groups from Mexico. Was there a lot of cross-border collaboration in those days? Were artists from Tijuana and Baja California coming up and working with you all?
There were a couple of artists that worked with us, but there wasn't really that much collaboration between the artists. The mural work in Mexico seemed to have come to a standstill. And what we were involved in was a resurgence of mural painting, primarily because Chicano studies were not established yet. And we wanted to see our history on the walls. The issues of the murals depict our tragedies, our ideals, and our victories. Our issues, our political issues, and these are some of the themes of the murals. So they stimulate critical thinking. They're intended to stimulate your imagination, question. I have to also admit that the first works on the walls were graffiti. Mm-hmm. And so the graffiti also played a very key role in the history of the development of Chicano art, as well as another very important element, or let's say another art form that exists called pinto art. Art being done in the prisons by both men and women. This art is so important and so dynamic. It comes out in the form of tattoos, patterns and drawings, and their materials are very limited. But in Chicano art, we see posters being developed. We see newspapers, illustrations, wood blocks being cut for the newspapers, like La Verdad, for example, the early stages of La Verdad, a newspaper, a Chicano newspaper of San Diego. We see ink drawings, and we see pamphlets, and we also begin to see murals that talk about our history, that talk about our issues.
Now, one of the most striking murals in the park is at street level there, where you have basically Chicano, Mexicano history portrayed. Were you the driving force behind that mural? And who are some of the figures that we're going to see here?
We're looking at Zapata, we're looking at Rojas, also Pancho Villa, Benito Juarez, Padre Hidalgo,
Cesar
Chavez, Che, Fidel Castro, Reyes López Tejerinas, Ortiz, one of the first Mexican Americans to actually hijack an airplane to bring the awareness of the issues of the Mexican Americans to the forefront, having to do with social conditions of welfare, work, employment, education. Then one of the other dynamic figures in the mural is is Ruben Salazar, another very important figure in our history. Ruben Salazar was a newsman, a television commentator. He was killed in the Chicano Moratorium, which was a march put together to stop the war in Vietnam, where a lot of Chicanos were being killed. Not only Chicanos, but blacks were being killed on the forefront. And another very important part about this moratorium is that the Brown Berets played a very key role in stopping this war and developing and in being involved in these marches. And that's when Ruben Salazar, August 29th, 1970, was killed. Ironically, he was killed by a sheriff, a Los Angeles sheriff, shot a gas canister into his head at El Peso de Plata. So there are other figures in there. There's Diego Rivera, there's Siqueiros, Orozco, Frita Kahlo, Juan Diego, Pablo O'Higgins, raised in El Cajon, and he went to Mexico to become a muralist. He was born in Salt Lake, Utah. So there's a lot of figures. There's a lot of activity in that area.
Now, one of the visual symbols that's very powerful in our culture is the Virgen de Guadalupe. And I'm wondering if she has had any place in your art and how you interpret that figure for the Chicano movement and beyond.
When I first made my image of the Virgen de Guadalupe, I stripped her out of the aura of her containment and made an abstract piece out of it. I also was very devoted to La Virgen de Guadalupe, prayed to her, carried her little image on my chest. But after becoming more aware of the Catholic Church's involvement with the farm workers and seemingly the exploitation of what was going on in this period, my first painting was a strip, and it was all colors. I stripped her right out of this aura and just made the colors and the images of her, but still had respect for her. To contrast this, let's look at some explosive paintings that I did of mines. These are mines that today are blowing off people's feet,
Right.
and arms and legs. And when I occupied the Ford building in Balboa Park, I found a whole chart of explosive mines. And so we're looking at now at paintings of these mines, of these exploding devices that can kill. Today, hundreds and hundreds of people are being maimed, not only in Africa and Angola and places like that, but also in Latin America. This is starting to take place.
Right. Now, you've done a lot of collaborations with your wife, Gloria, who's also an artist. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about her art. I know she was born in Los Angeles and grew up here in San Diego.
I met Gloria. You made an early commentary about her involvement with Chicano Park, but her involvement with Chicano Park comes at a later time period. But I met her in 1983, and Gloria was probably one of the most intriguing people I had met during this time period, and so we married. And we began our mural projects at Memorial Junior High School. Here's an interesting period here. You're looking at a painting where we're working on the mural. And Gloria wanted to paint with us. She really wanted to paint. And during this time, I had formed the Chicano Park Arts Council and developed it into a corporation, and we became the Chicano Park Arts Council Incorporated, and solicited funds from Combo and other agencies and other industries to work with us. And I must tell you that when we did this, NOSCO, Southwest Marine, Continental Maritime, also Calco Company, these industries became very open to us. And NASCO donated scaffolding, San Diego Gas and Electric donated helmets and hoses.
And they're the ones who you had protested against years earlier.
Years
It
earlier.
shows the different.
The change, there was
right.
a big change taking place. And Calco commissioned me to do this mural. This mural that you're looking at now is a monumental piece that Gloria and I worked on. So Gloria begins, what you're seeing now is Gloria painting. She's painting a theme of goats. When she was a young girl living here in San Diego, the family had goats, and they had Nubian goats. And they raised these goats, they fed them raisins and milk, raisins and oats, and their goat milk was very sweet, according to her. And so her paintings that we're looking at now are of these hilarious, wonderful, colorful goats that she recalls as a child. And so, but she's also been involved in mural work. She's been involved in the development of the cactus garden in Chicano Park. She carved out the huge kiva on the earth there. We were married there. She was involved in restoration work, and so she learned from the very beginning, from washing brushes to real apprentice, all the way to directing murals now, as far as I'm concerned. She helps me direct them.
Now, one of the most recent ones you've done is the Calco mural. Could you talk about that?
I'm going to be restoring the Calco mural real soon. It's now the Monsanto Calco industry. It used to be the place where a lot of the workers would go out and harvest kelp.
Kelp, right.
And then after we did this, we did the Santa Fe Railway mural. Santa Fe now is merged with Burlington Northern. So we worked on these murals together, and Gloria we actually set up a makeshift outdoor studio. She was right there with me, developing a kitchen and a bedroom, and as I said, she started off by doing brushes and then laying in big swashes of color and working right along. And then she began becoming more and more sensitive to composition and advised me and directed me. And so we really made a good male-female mural team.
Mm-hmm. Now, going back to the park, I know in your gallery there's a painting of the original vision of Chicano Park, which included a community clinic and in fact included a university of Raza or Chicano studies. Could you talk about that original vision?
After the takeover of Chicano Park, immediately I had proclaimed that we were going to do these murals, that the space that was available to us, these gigantic monumental columns, would soon embrace and be part of a concept that would extend itself all the way to the bay with murals. And the idea of developing murals not only was important, but the materials to be used was important. And as I said, during this time period, we also began planning for our community. And so we were faced with two things. One, you take over land, which is the highest order in any revolution, is the takeover of land. But then comes the responsibility. If you're going to take it over, what are you going to do with it? So we were faced with planning for the best park that we could possibly plan for. We even provided designs for makeshift toys, play equipment. We began, Luis Espinosa, one of the most important Chicano artists of this time period, who was working along with me, designed the park. He had this great sculpture piece of the mestizo face in the park with flowers. And not only was the park beginning to be planned, but we had to go beyond the borders of the plan of the park. And so the takeover of the neighborhood house at the same time, provided us with, again, a plan for the neighborhood house. And what other plan could be most satisfying than a hospital?
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea of a Chicano hospital, and it was, to us, it was a free hospital that would incorporate two dynamic aspects of healing. The indigenous, which is the hierberos, the hierbas, the sobadores, the indigenous healing methods, along with high tech. And these two come together and create the Chicano hospital. Then the escuela had already been formed, an alternative school in Barrio Logan, and the escuelita del barrio had already been formed. So the next step was to think about, well, where are we going from here? We have the little school and the escuela and the escuelita. Let's go to the university del barrio. Mm-hmm. And so the idea was, here we're planning for our education, we're planning for our health, and we're planning for the extension of the murals all the way across to the other side of Coronado. And so the mercado concept also was introduced during this time period, where it's now being, it's germinating, it's growing. And so we also wanted to see a kiosco in the park. There was talk about plans for a swimming pool, which now the barrio station has a swimming pool. These were all human needs that were important to us, that we needed to see, that we needed to participate in, we needed to develop if it wasn't happening to it. And so that's how the master plan began to develop.
Right. Now, the pillars of the bridge, I know you've studied in some detail the pillars and every facet of the pillar, even below the water line. And you talked to me once about your concept of muralism, which is really a kind of holistic concept, so that one would study the environment around it, the light shifts during the day on the murals. Could you talk to us about that? I think that's very important, because most people don't understand. Most people think of a mural as a flat surface on a wall, when in reality it's really not.
The Chicano Park monumental mural concept begins, first of all, with the takeover of the land. And with the takeover of the land, meaning planting trees, flowers, cactus, indigenous plants, flowering trees, fruit trees. That is where we start from. And then from there comes the next step of the murals. And the murals, from my concept, was not just to go paint murals and leave, but you go there and you work the land and you work on the murals at the same time. That's very important. I don't see that happening right now. But in the very beginning stages, this was the ideal, is to work the land and the murals together. And so we began planting cactus, and palm trees started growing up, and we started by themselves. And we started trimming them and cultivating them. And so here are these walls, these dynamic walls moving in different directions. Huge pillars with arches and great arms and shadows being reflected during the day and night. And all this manifested a challenge in my mind. How do you get to this height without any money, with very little support? So I began using mirrors, and I would take a mirror with the sunlight and draw the designs, and I began using bigger mirrors, and pretty soon the police came and they confiscated the mirrors, thinking that I was a crazy man out there. But the idea was that I was exploring the movements on the bridge, the movements, thinking in terms of how the designs would work, and combining one column with the next column with the next column, looking at it as a whole, not one little wall here, not one piece there. And the reason for that's the way it's happening now is because we have no funds. Mm-hmm. And artists are doing it on a volunteer basis. This is a period where it's no longer a directionless program. It has to have direction. It has to have some knowledge. how we're going to deal with the development of these designs. I foresee the computerization of the entire bridge so that you see the volumes one against the other, designs in different ways. I see us working with industry. I see us working with the city, the state, and making a harmonious development of this direction. That's why you see the tram going through there and a monorail, and I began the designs by diving around the columns. You can count 6 columns out from Coronado. I dove all around those by myself after leaving the Centro Cultural. Because I had a theory. My theory was that the columns going down into the water would soon provide a habitat. And the habitat would bring life back into the Senio Bay. And sure enough, I dove out there and I found rich with sea life all around the columns. And also during this time period, I've been very influenced by Paulo Soleri and the use of space under the water and space under the ground. And so I developed the concept of the Chicano Park Underground Museum, Archaeological Museum. And so I made a model of this, dug out a model, and also thinking of terms how we could use the space under the water as well as utilizing space above the bridge so it could be compatible and safe with sea traffic. And we never had any waterfront parks or anything like that, and now we do.
Is there still a move to bring the park all the way to the bay? I know that's always been one of the goals.
The park is all the way to the bay now. Okay. There's a pier there, but they refer to it as Bayfront Park. But to us, it's Chicano Park on the waterfront. It's extended all the way down there. And I think that the dynamics of doing unique murals require a lot of study. You just can't do murals just like that. You have to really study what you're doing, take everybody into consideration. In this case, we have industry there, we have private property owners, we have commercial interests, and still talk about our lives and talk about our issues and work together if it's possible.
What do you see as the current state of the Chicano art movement? A lot of people call this the post-movement period, which seems to be in line with a lot of talk about the end of history and that struggles for liberation have ended. Do you feel that there is still a strong movimiento, and what part is art playing in it now?
Well, first of all, I like to look at the role that I've been involved in as an artist. And I see that I came out of a Chicano movement, supporting the farm workers, developing Chicano Park, supporting the development of studies that relate to our issues. And so from this comes the Chicano movement art. That's one form. Then we have artists who have been involved now and begin collaborating and work outside of this particular aspect to some extent. And their work comes from the Chicano art movement. So we have these two unique energy sources of artists involved and writers involved. Today, we're involved in the unique planning of one of the largest exhibitions that we're hoping to do. And the San Diego's Unified Port District is going to be the event sponsor for one of the largest art exhibitions of Chicano and Chicana artists to be held at the B Street Pier, right where the terminal, port terminal, I mean the cruise ship terminal comes. We're planning to have at least from between 200 and 300 artists, men and women, and between 2,500 artworks.
And when will this take place?
We're looking at September of 1999, September the 17th to October the 17th. And this is going to really make a whole new feeling for San Diego because we see the port, we see industry, we see all of these people in the background taking care of business, but yet not relating to our communities. Now we see this change. And so the Chicano art movement not only is important in that it's assisting to make change, but we're also developing what I call the Chicano Art Market. And that is important because now we're making our art available to the people. Where Gloria and I spent thousands and thousands of hours working in Chicano Park.
For free.
For free and never getting paid.
Right.
Finally, we branch out and paint some murals where we are recompensated for our works. But in the meantime, we're doing paintings, we're doing prints, we're doing drawings. And now we've opened a gallery. And it's the Metro Art Gallery. They're in Barrio Logan. And what's unique about it is it used to be the Metro Theater.
Right.
It was a Spanish-speaking theater. Actually, it was opened in 1916 as a silent film theater. And then around the 20s and 30s, it was a talkie show. Then around the 40s and 50s, it became the Spanish-speaking theater of Logan Heights. And that's where Pedro Infante came in person. I saw Cantinflas for the first time, and many of the people of the neighborhood all went there because it was the only Spanish-speaking theater in Logan Heights. And that's where my gallery is. And I'm also the director of the Museo del Pueblo. And we've had shows in parks and in schools. We had a show here as part of the Museo del Pueblo's event here at UCSD. We're intending to make that location the Museo del Pueblo's gallery also, because the same space for the theater is still there.
Right.
And so that would be dynamic. It would be very dynamic to see a museum like that in Barrio Logan, and to see a gallery appealing to our collectors, making our arts available to them.
Can you tell us what the hours of the gallery are? And
The hours are from 10 to 4:30 daily. And the phone number there is 236-1167. And you're welcome to come and visit and see some of the artwork there.
right. Now I know you're also selling the Viva La Raza series in a kind of limited edition. Could you tell our viewers
We're looking
about
at this
that?
poster once again. This is a silkscreen print. There's 129 of them. It was developed in the self-help graphics studio of Los Angeles with a master printer, and Gloria and I went there last year, and it has 7 runs. It took us about a week and a half to develop it and work it. And self-help graphics is probably one of the most unique ateliers in California where they actually help the artists, and the artists can work with the master printers and develop our prints. So they're going to be showing at this exhibit. We're planning to invite 5 culture centers. Mm-hmm. And self-help graphics will be one of them. We're inviting the Galeria de la Raza in San Francisco. We'd love to see their works. Galeria Posadas bookstore, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, in Sacramento,
Mm-hmm.
and a few others.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Salvador. It's been a great honor to have you here with us today.
Muchísimas gracias, Jorge. Thank you very much.
And all the best luck with the gallery and all your other projects. And thank you all for watching UCSD Guestbook. Buenas noches.